good evening, cheeky natives. Welcome to another conversation with us, the cheeky natives. Dr. Slay will join us in a bit, but I thought, I don't want to keep you all waiting because you've been anticipating this conversation. So I kind of want to get us started. Yes, I'm sitting in the dark because, our beloved South Africa has started with its load shedding. But load shedding will not stop good literature and good conversation. And so today we're going to have a wonderful conversation. And I think there's been a really wonderful time in relation to books and particularly debut authors. Like they've just really brought fresh perspectives and fresh ideas and just like new stories that we like to read. So we're so grateful to be in conversation today with the author of On Rotation. That is my book. Yes, On Rotation. The cover is so lovely. So on front, like some of the blurbs are like, it's just what the doctor ordered. And it says, because life doesn't always come with a prescription. So I'm just going to read the author about the author. Shirlene Obuobi is a Ghanaian-American physician, cartoonist, and author who grew up in Chicago, Illinois, Hot Springs, Kansas, and Woodlands, Texas. When she's not in the hospital, and let's be honest, even when she is, she can be found drawing comics, writing on her phone, and obsessing over her 3 cats. She currently lives in Chicago, where she's completing a cardiology fellowship. Listen, come on, like cardiology fellowship is not even like just a no, just a physician who's completing their cardiology fellowship. So, hi, Shirley, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and I'm doing well. I'm actually myself on holiday, so that's why you see me looking so easy breezy and made up.
No, I'm glad. And I'm glad that you took the time to kind of, come and talk to us about your book while you're on holiday. We really appreciate it, and I think our listeners and our viewers are very excited to kind of tap into the conversation. But I suppose, tell me a little bit about the cardiology fellowship. I think that's a little fascinating tidbit of information, and I wanted to find out more about that. Why cardiology?
Oh, for sure. So, for everyone who doesn't know, cardiology is a focus on the human heart. So, I am a heart doctor. Why cardiology? So, I'll say the boring answer, and then I'll say the more titillating answer. The boring answer is that I really enjoy the physiology. I think the heart is it's a complex organ, but it's also quite simple. You can think your way through it, and someone can present to you, and you can get a pretty good understanding of what is actually going on physiologically, just by talking to them, right, and by thinking through what's backed up where, basically, right. And the more titillating answer is that when I realized I was really interested in the physiology, it was quite honestly, it's a very male dominated field. There's like no people of color in it, basically. I think it's 13% women, and something similar for Black and Latino representation. So there, but it's still one of the top. It is the top killer, at least in the United States. Cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of Americans, and I really felt almost like a calling in the sense to be able, because I'm quite good at translating complicated medical concepts into, I think, into more palatable tidbits. So I felt like this was a place where I was probably needed. And so now here I am.
As a cardiology resident doing a fellowship, yes, 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 yes.
Thank you.
Um, I suppose the kind of obvious questions that I guess most people ask you, which I'm also really fascinated in, because I mean I've read a lot of stories, but this one kind of resonated in a ways that we will discuss later on. But I
Mhm.
wanted to know why why on rotation? Why was this the offering that you gave the world?
So I felt like so I'll start from the beginning, right? Like I've written my entire life, right? Since I was a kid, since I was, yeah, I tell people my 10th birthday party was a book signing. My parents bound a book that I wrote and everybody bought it. It was all very fun. Um, but I, for a long time, was very scared of writing about any characters that shared my experience, right? So whether that was a Black female experience or a Ghanaian American experience or experience in medicine. And I actually went to a talk it was by Juno Diaz, where he like called out the writers in the room, and he specifically said that, look, if you're afraid of writing about yourself, don't be, right? Like everybody does it, or writing about characters who are similar to you. You are the one who is able to tell your story, right? And so for the first time, I was like, yeah, like why not? And I tell people Angie isn't me, right? So the people who know me well know this very, very well. And I intentionally make her, we share a lot of experiences, but maybe a lot of the ways that she thinks aren't necessarily ways that I think, right? But she contains a lot of parts of me. And I felt like I, like this was a story that I hadn't seen really before, and that I had every right to tell it. So I wanted people who hadn't seen themselves really, like I say in my dedication that it's for my Black nerdy girls, right? Who growing up I would get told that, oh, like that being into, I'm a huge nerd. I like superheroes and comics and all of that stuff. Again, being into that was supposedly a white thing, right? I also see to the dark skinned girls, right? Because even amongst in Black literature, it's hard to find a darker skinned Black protagonist, right? And especially not one who's finding love, right? Is whose main story is, or one of the main stories is exploring love, right? And I think I say also to it's the two, although I think it may be closer to 4% now of Black women or of medical students who are Black women, right? So because we have this very unique experience in the United States, especially that isn't shared by other medical students or other medical professionals, and I wanted them to see that that experience was shared, right? And it's been kind of one of the most awesome parts about On Rotation being out is hearing other people say, yeah, no, like I thought this was just me. I thought these were my thoughts, right? Like I felt called out, right? Things like that have been incredibly rewarding.
And I suppose, I mean, I want to say that I really enjoyed your book. As I was saying to you before we started the conversation, that I have recently just come back from holiday, and I found that this book was such a perfect holiday read. Like I remember reading the blurb before taking it, and I was like, okay, it sounds like something that one can enjoy on holiday. And I think I read the first 200 pages like in one day, just because it was just like so titillating, and I just wanted to find more, like what's happening, what's going on. Like then I was like, okay, you need to slow down, like you need to slow down so that you can savor and enjoy the book. But really, it was like one of those books where I found that I just wanted to know what happened to Angie and what was
No,
going to
thank
happen
you.
next, and what was going to do this and this and this and this and this. I suppose I'll start here. One of the things that I think On Rotation does really well is sort of speak about the nuances and the challenges, but also the loving bits of female friendships. I
Yeah,
think a lot of stories have been told about female friendships, but one thing I think that On Rotation does, which I haven't found in another books, is sort of female friendships where one of the friends are not straight, and how you kind of navigate that kind of relationship with
yeah,
someone who is straight on the one hand and someone who is queer on the other hand. And I
yeah.
wanted to find out from you, why was it important for you to kind of do a sisterhood and queerify the sisterhood? Because I think that's what you did in many instances. You're like, yes, we know about these types of friendships, but we don't know about this dynamic in the friendship and what it brings to. So I wanted to start there and think about like the work that you're trying to do with the friendship between the two characters in the book.
Oh, first of all, I love that question. I haven't gotten it before, and I'm always looking for it. First of all, I really wanted On Rotation to reflect my own friend groups, right, and my own relationships in a lot of ways. And I have like a lot of friends who identify as queer, right? And I felt that often when you do have these kinds of setups where you have a straight part like friend and like a straight female friend, her best friend is like a gay man usually, right? And you usually don't have the dynamics where you have two women and the best friend, one of them is queer, one of them is straight, right? And I wanted that to be there because I wanted it to be human, and I wanted the fact that Nia is queer to actually be relevant, in their relationship. Like when they start having a spoiler, I suppose, when they start having issues, the fact that Angie's like, look, like Nia's always wanted to have a queer family, right? Like she's always needed that, right? And Angie's like, I'm not going to begrudge her the fact that she's found that, but she's also feels a sense of loss when Nia now kind of is spending more time with her queer family, right? And maybe less with Angie. And of course, there's more complications to that dynamic. But I felt like it was one where, in general, I tried to write on rotation in a way that felt true to the characters, where their identities really mattered to them, and it affected the way they interacted with the world, without being um like a like I didn't want it to be like a, a vehicle to teach people things, right? Like I just wanted these friends to exist, and these issues that would exist naturally to actually be addressed. So I'm really happy that that was something that stood out to you.
But and it's something that you say, because what even stood out to me is the fact that, like, as you say, these people's identity was central to who they are, right?
Right.
But they weren't making the decision that they were making because they were straight or because they were queer. They
Right.
were making the decision that they were making because they were human. And
Exactly.
oftentimes, I think that what we tend to do is we tend to ascribe certain behavioral traits to a
Mhm.
particular sexuality or a particular gender, where I
Exactly.
think what you're trying to do between Angie and Nia was to say these are two people who
Yeah.
are friends and have been friends,
Mhm.
and these are the issues that they experience.
Mhm.
And you know what? It is important that there is a straight woman and there is a queer woman, because it
Mhm.
kind of shows you how they relate. Because one thing that you are saying, which I think was really important, and that I wanted us to talk about, was this idea of like chosen family, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
how Nia for a long time is saying, yes, Angie, I love you, and Michelle, I love all of you. But
Right.
there are things that I want to discuss that, like, I just want people to get, right?
Right.
So when the Les Brigade comes along, and it's like this non there's no place of explaining, but it's just place of being, right? Like,
Right.
it's something that I thought was really important. And I wanted us to speak a little bit about that. Why
Mhm.
was it important for you to kind of show the importance of chosen family? Because I
Right.
think oftentimes we think when we just have this friend group and people accept us, that that's kind of chosen family. But what
Right.
I think you try to do with the character is
Mhm.
to indicate that even though you have a loving family that supports you and loving friends that support you, there is sometimes a friend group or another relationship that you're seeking, where, like, you don't have to explain particular things and
Yes.
you just want to be. And I
Right.
wanted you to just speak a little bit more about that particular thing. Why was it important for you to write about chosen family in the way that you did?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of honor rotation. So honor rotation, of course, is about all different kinds of love, right? It's in some places like marketed as a romance, but I think it's a little bit broader than that, right? It's love for self, love for family, right? Platonic love, right? As well as the romantic element. And I think there are multiple chosen families in there, like Angie and Nia. They are a chosen family, right? That's one thing I tried
Exactly.
to establish right from the beginning, right? Is that
Yeah,
she
yeah.
comes home, like she goes to her parents' house, but she really feels home when she comes home and Nia's there, right? Like
Yes.
Nia is home, right? And so that is why when their friendship starts to fragment, right, that's why it's so catastrophic, right? Because it's the breakdown of a home, right, and of a
Yes.
family,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes.
And yeah, and I wanted to show different types of those families, right? Like, and how those, like, each of Angie's relationships brings a different dimension. And it's exactly as you were saying, right? It's not that Nia and Angie are any less sisters or best friends, right? They're not any less their family because Angie's really unable to show Nia certain things, or that Nia's not able to understand like some of Angie's life, right? Maybe Nia has a harder time understanding Angie's life in medicine, right? And I think I have a line somewhere where I think it's Angie says something like Nia's problems are they're different, not less, right? And I think that's something that runs through kind of I tried to make run through the entire story, right? Is that their experiences are different but not less valid, right? Their love for each other is different but not less. And
Yeah.
so so that was kind of the, I hope, I know that was quite a long answer, but that was kind of what I was
No,
going.
no, no, no. Look, I'm absolutely loving this conversation. And I'm like
Me
kind of
too.
wanting to twist your arm to be like, when you're back on holiday, perhaps we can like actually sit and have a podcast where we delve deeper into the spoilers. Because, you know, part of like having this conversation is to give people enough interest so that they can read the book. But I really want to discuss, there's some spoiling things that I want to discuss, you know, where we just can be open and honest. So perhaps
About what
let's
actually
let's
happened.
speak
Yeah,
after this so we can speak some more.
yeah,
But it's something that you said that's really interesting for me was, you know, oftentimes when we read, like Angie's character for me is quite interesting, and it's interesting because Angie sort of shows us the broad spectrum of being a woman and of being
yeah.
a person in the world, right?
Mhm,
So you think about the moments of Angie's selfishness, right?
mhm, mhm,
So I
mhm,
think about the instances in which Nia calls her out and says, "But you don't even know who my friends are. What's this person's name and what's that?" To be like, she's been so self-absorbed in herself and having Nia to herself alone, that the prospect of having someone else come along is threatening to her. And her
right.
response in that is to become selfish, right? And to be
Yeah.
like, I don't care about these people. They weren't here before. Like, why do they suddenly matter now? But I think what was really interesting is just this element of selfishness that, like, as much as we don't want to admit it, there is some parts of us that would be Angie in a situation to be like, I don't care about those people. I don't care about them. They're not my friends, right? And I wanted
Right.
to speak a little bit about that, right? Just like the way in which he humanized Angie, to not make her this perfect person, but to say that she is a human person who has human feelings. And one of them was jealousy, and the idea that
Yeah.
like her home is going to be broken and it's going to be irretrievable. And
Mhm,
I think there's a line in the book where she says, like, I don't know what my life is going to be without Nia. Right. So like the idea of like this person has always been here. Like
mhm,
there's a part where Nia you know, they have the fight, and she essentially says like, I can't imagine someone else being in this spot where Nia used to be, right? So like
mhm.
the idea of like life is going to change drastically, and I'm not pleased with that. So I wanted to know like the giving her a full spectrum of emotion and feelings to
Yeah.
deal with. Why was that important for you?
Oh gosh, I love this question. First of all, I'm so glad you picked up on Angie's selfishness, because I think that's one thing that like I tried to make a little obvious, but I say that I accidentally made the most convincing character, right? Because people like are like, no, Angie's always right. I'm like, she is absolutely not. But anyway, I wanted her to be imperfect. I wanted her to be stumbling, right? So I am also a lover of books and I'm a lover of reading. And I think, of course, this landscape is changing. But I think there's always, when I wrote this story, especially a story where the main purpose is really finding herself and learning to love and be loved and accept love, right? Um, Hello, um, and but I wanted it to I feel like a lot of times the narratives that we're kind of used to when we see Black women is of narratives of I say this, it's a harsh thing to say, but of a mule, a beast of burden, like someone who's noble and does the right things and things happen to them, right? And they overcome the things that happen to them, right? But feel like humanity is so much more complicated than that. And that I really wanted to write a character who was fully human, right? And who would have, a human, which is sometimes we're self-centered and self-absorbed, right? Like sometimes, and especially under pressure, right? Sometimes we give people more leeway, or we give ourselves more leeway than we give other people, right? And I wanted Angie to have those feelings and really have to wrestle with them. I didn't want it to be like a quick, oh, she's figured out that maybe there's new perspectives, right? There's other perspectives. I wanted her to actually wrestle with them throughout the course of the book and grow up because of it.
And I do think, to be honest with
Hi,
you, as the book
sorry,
progresses,
I don't know if you can hear me. Hi,
yes, we
everyone.
can. Hi, Alma.
Hi,
Sorry.
Alma.
Speaking of imperfect Black women, I'm at work and I'm traveling. I'm at the airport, so I'm just going to insert myself as soon as I am up to speak. But thank you so much, Shirlene, and good evening, everybody. I'm super excited for today's conversation. I can relate to so much of Angie's story. Just being Black woman, doctor, love, etc. So I'm here, and let's go.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Black woman, doctorhood, up in here, up in here. Okay, I see you. I don't
Yeah.
have an MD, so don't let me play in the
So
dog
you
box
can't sit
because
with
I don't
us.
have an MD.
So you actually can't sit with us.
You can sit with me. I'm joking.
I wanted to move one of the other themes that I think both Alma and I resonated with, and I think a lot of people, and particularly maybe people who do kind of who either studied, even studied and then went to go work, or studied and then didn't go to work. But this weight of expectation in like kind of you are only going to be a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer. Like those are the things that you're going to do. And I think there is some weight of familial expectations in the book that you deal with quite well. Like Angie's parents basically told her that as the first daughter, we want you to be a doctor, and you are going to be a doctor. And I think that like, even though she may end up having enjoyed medicine and all these particular things, right, that weight of expectation makes it quite challenging for her to appreciate and appreciate all the things that she needs to appreciate. And I wanted to speak about that, right? Kind of this idea of the weight of expectation from our families and how that kind of makes what we end up doing a lot more difficult. And maybe sometimes we resent our parents for these things, right? We know there's a moment in the book where Angie's like, screw you, I'm done. And that was kind of liberating, because I was like, yo, we know that if we were to do that to our parents, we would be dead.
Mommy, do you hear that? No. But I really wanted to go into that, actually, because I think and I wanted over the course of the novel, right? Because part of the thing that comes up is there's a lot of issues and a lot of conflict with her family. I think a lot of immigrant children, African children, can relate to the fact that, our families don't have a baseline necessarily of wealth, right? And that our parents often made sacrifices. They sacrificed their own self-determination a lot of times, right? They sacrificed whatever their own like aspirations were in order to survive and to create a world, right, where their children could be successful. And I think there's an expectation in a lot of our communities that we make good with that sacrifice, right? And that we do it in ways that are not risky, and medicine is a kind of field, and all the ones you mentioned, engineering, accountants, right? They're professions, right? There's good job markets, they're well paying, all of those things that are low risk, right? High tendency for high reward, right? But leave little room for, because the whole thing, that one of the things that comes up, which I'll try to stay away from spoilers, is that the expectation doesn't stop there. Like, she's in medical school, it should be done, right? But they kind of keep getting more and more and more granular, because there's more and more concern that, oh, maybe if they aren't careful and they aren't ushering her down a path, that she'll go wayward or something, right? And that in a lot of ways, Angie's like who's actually going through the training, right? Finds it frustrating. She finds it that she can't really, as you said, almost enjoy the experience or completely immerse herself in the experience of learning medicine, because it's not just about the learning, right? It's because somebody else is like watching over her, right? Like, and trying to dictate her moves, right? And so, as you said, like the moment where she says, screw you, and starts talking to them. I mean, that only works when you don't live with them anymore, right?
And it's interesting that you mentioned the idea of like, she's not even enjoying or be able to immerse herself. But it's also like, even when she is not doing well, the
Right.
first thing that her parents are saying is because of all those boys and all these other things that you're doing, right? So there
Right.
is kind of feels also no recognition of our parents understanding how incredibly difficult it is to do the things that we do and do them well.
Mhm.
Like there's just expectation that you have a roof over your head, all you need to worry about is study. So
Right.
for me, I felt like also one of the kind of underlying bubbling tensions that you're exploring in the book was that Angie's parents don't see Angie as a fully
Full.
fledged human person.
Right.
What they see her of is a conduit of their own dreams. And
Right.
so they keep wanting for her to achieve those dreams without realizing that she is a person on herself and needs to do her own work. And that comes with whatever challenges and difficulties it may come with.
Exactly.
And so they see her for the doctor that she can become, but they don't see her for the Angie who she is.
Exactly. And that is one of the big things that has to happen by over the course of the book is that no, there needs to be a shift in how she's viewed within her family, right? And that shift needs to acknowledge the fact that she's a full human in the same way that they're full humans, right? They're full humans
Yeah.
who also made mistakes and like had dated people and had drama, right? Like and all those things and found their way, right? Because I always I think it's really interesting when we're talking to our friends who are first generation or immigrants, where you're like, how well do you even know your parents? Like, how well do you know what they did when they were young? Do you know anything about it, or do you only know the parent archetype that they've delivered to you, they're like shown you your whole life, right? And often when you actually get to the age where you actually get to know your parents, you're like, oh, like you also went through things, right? You also experienced your world was way bigger than I thought it was, right? Um, and kind of being able to get to the point where her parents can see that in her and she can also see that in them is, I think, very healing for both of them, for the entire Pia family.
Do you know what I found interesting is the particular section of the coming of age. So you think of coming of age as a young adult, wouldn't typically be in your mid 20s. So at that stage you're expecting that people have really in many ways come into their own. But I often think Black eldest daughters experience almost a second puberty. So you have puberty,
Yeah.
you then need to have a second puberty where everybody in your life realizes that they actually can't speak to you in particular ways, they can't move in particular ways around you, but you also have to reestablish your identity. And often for women, that means that she then has to get married or have some sort of other mark of this transition of adulthood. And I found it so interesting that this coming of age is for somebody who is in medical school, who's also in their mid 20s. You'd expect that they have already come into their own. And you may have discussed this, but I'm interested in the positioning and the chronology of that particular timing and why you made the choice for that.
I love that you said second puberty because that's actually how I often say it, that it's a coming of age that takes place. It's a second coming of age, right? And I wanted to highlight that for a few reasons. Number one, I thought there was a whole cohort of people, right, who experience this second coming of age and then, but almost feel like they're behind, right? That they missed the boat in some way, that they're a late bloomer in some way, and that experience is not normal or it's limited to them. But it's exactly as you're saying. I think a lot of us who, if we're saying the first coming of age happens when you're 18 in an African household, right? like that's nothing, right? You're still a child, right? And so I think that for I wanted to be instead at a time when there were so many other things at limbo. I think the mid 20s are a great time for that. I think it's a time when you have to like people start really figuring out what they want to do with the rest of their lives, right? Like it really sinks in, that you're your own person and you have to support yourself, and how are you going to do that, right? It's a time when like friendships start shifting because some friends start getting married and having kids, and some friends like, maybe they're still living with their parents, like some friends, like, so there's so much variation in what people are doing around this time, right? And it changes the dynamics of friendships, and then there's also, of course, like, she's a woman, and I talk pretty early on in the book about the pressure, right? that Angie's the opening, one of the early scenes in the book is Angie's sister gets engaged, right? And it's her younger sister. And the ironic thing, of course, is that as you were saying that, like, Angie's being told that she's spending all of her time with boys, but there also is an expectation that she should also have found a boy, right? Right?
And it's not just any boy, right? It's a
Yes.
boy with a particular pedigree, a boy with a particular degree,
Yes.
potentially a boy from a particular African family.
Yes.
So even that weight, it's like, yes, you're messing time with boys, but the boys you're even messing with are not the right ones.
They're not the ones
like,
we want.
There is a part in the book where the mom, in a kind of turn of the moment thing, right? So she's kind of reflecting that, like, this person who you're with has done this that someone else wouldn't do. But she kind of in that is saying, you see, that person couldn't even put $30 for gas to come and see your family. That is not the type of man that you want, right?
Yeah.
And obviously she said in the context of this other person has done this other thing, which is nice, and you should go after them for this other thing. But even the way that she's saying it is like, if it was a lawyer or if it was a doctor, we wouldn't have any of this. And if they came from a good African family, we wouldn't have any of this, right? So
Right.
it's interesting to think about, like, even that. Because for me, the second puberty is also like a weird type of thing, right? Because with Angie particularly, and I think with most of us, it's also, you grow up kind of believing that, like, your life will be less meaningful if you don't spend it with someone, right?
Yes.
And for most of us, we actually really do want to spend our lives with someone because we've seen how companionship can be meaningful and, wonderful and all of that. And I think that one thing that Angie grapples with quite a lot is that, like, the people in her life that she considers close have their people. Shay has her person. Her sister has her person. Her parents have their person, and she kind of is the only one who doesn't have her person, right? And we are introduced to this kind of complex character called Ricky, who enters Angie's life.
Ricky is messy, though. Ricky is
and the way that
low-key
the way that I just want to say, like, from the very first day they met, I was like, too good to be true. Something is going on here, because, like, I mean, we just don't meet people and it's happily ever after.
Less of that. Sorry, Shirlene. I think it's less of him being too good to be true, but like him being so heavily flawed in ways that almost make it difficult to want to defend him, right? So he meets her, and there's always gray areas where Ricky's concerned. He meets her. He knows that he has a partner when he meets her. He posits himself as like, now I was just so astounded by your being so I had to come speak to you. And now I'm not going to call you because I have a girlfriend. Why did you talk to me? Like, what was the aim? Because you weren't trying to be my friend. But now you also just want us to vibe. So you've been in relationships with all these people you were able to commit. Now when it's my turn, you are in a space of self-discovery. Now what is that, right? It's like every other time you've been loving hard, you've been committing yourself. Now it's my turn, and suddenly, I'm just finding myself. Ricky is high-key messy. He is messy. But we'll get back to Ricky. But for me, I'm interested in something that you raised, and I think it's a real question of companionship in the space of self-preservation. And I feel like often for Black women, those two things are antagonistic, right? So you have companionship, but that often comes at the risk of not preserving self, right? So it means that I think of a relationship with the lawyer and how much of herself she had to fold and bend and reduce and make smaller because it made this man uncomfortable for this woman to be visibly Black, but also to be loud and to take up space and to be smart. And I think that you posit that question of companionship versus self-preservation, and how often it's a tug of war for Black women, and what does that look like? And that's the question I'm interested in.
Yes, actually. So, and I think that is the whole underlying thing. I mean, I could go, first of all, I'm gonna say no Ricky slander on this podcast. Nobody calling him gaslighting or abusing or anything like that, but I will fight you. But
he's messy though. He's messy.
he's messy.
He's
He's
messy.
intentionally messy. And the reason why he's messy is because I wanted to, that exactly what you were saying. It's the companionship versus self-preservation, right? In that, you know, in all of Angie's prior relationships or her dalliances, she hasn't really had relationships aside from that one guy, right? She has been looking for this companionship, but she's also found that it's at the expense of herself, right? And that often there is something because, and I really wanted to wrap up from the beginning, the fact that, you know, Angie's beautiful. It's not like she's not beautiful, right? She's a beautiful woman who doesn't fit Western standards of beauty, right? You know, and so she finds herself in these relationships or dalliances with straight men who want her to fit a mold because in my opinion, I think that men, well, at least I think that there's a lot of politics of desire that go on happen, right? Where people may love someone, they may be attracted to someone, but because of the politics of desire and because of how they feel they may be perceived with a person on their, how the person on their arm looks, they may not pursue that. They may not pursue that with their entire hearts, right? And as a person who occupies a space where like maybe where the politics of desire come, like they're disadvantaged in that sphere, right? What they may end up having are all of these interactions and relationships that don't fit the norm, right? Because Angie keeps meeting people who tell her that they love her or they say all the right things and then nothing happens, right? And with Ricky and how their relationship happens, she's built up her defenses already, right? You know, she has an idea of like, no, now I've learned over all of these interactions that this is how, like somebody, if someone really loves me, this is how they will behave, right? But I think people are more complicated than that. I think that I think the whole thing, the entire story is about kind of perspective and what's going on in different people's lives. And I think that something that happens with Angie and Ricky is that honestly, the timing is off, right? Like the timing with Ricky is really off. Like if she'd met him maybe 3 months, 4 months, 6 months down the road, maybe it would have been fine. But the time that she met him, he really wasn't ready, right? He was not ready for a relationship and he wasn't ready for what she was looking for, right? And she also had to grapple with that aspect of, you know, how much does she give of herself and allow, right? And excuse, right? And how, when she is allowing and excusing, how much of that is at the expense of herself? I don't know if that made sense.
And it's interesting you say that because I before we spoke, I had messaged Alma and spoke. I had literally said I want to discuss the issues of undesirability of self.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
like the idea of like environmental factors. So what you've spoken about, like this idea of beauty standards and how beauty standards affect how we show up. And
Right.
also as an extension of how those and politics of undesirability, of desirability, sort of impacts how we show up in relationships. But
Right.
what I think was even more fascinating for me is what you just said about like Ricky not being ready. I find that oftentimes people are not honest about what their intentions are. And you
Mhm.
see, this is why there's this dance between Ricky and Angie, right?
Mhm.
Because like Ricky knows for certain that they're not ready, but they also know that they're not ready to let Angie go.
Right.
So there is this like kind of toss between, do I say no, let's not do it now, or do I keep mining what I think I can get from this relationship while I figure out what it is that I want, right? And that
Well,
kind of is,
I would say it's
is
more
like, yeah.
complex than that. Keep going though.
Yes. I agree with you, but I think like I wanted to strip it to the bare bones, right? And just say like some instances it's like you are not ready, but you also are not ready to lose the person that you're not ready to be with.
Right.
And for me, the complexity also for Ricky is that
Mhm.
there's a lot of internal things that are happening. So, you know, you find that moments where Ricky says like, I like you because you tell me exactly what you think, right? Which I
Right.
feel that Ricky hasn't had. Like there have been a lot of people who've been coddling his feelings and what his feelings, where Angie is like, no, babes, you kind of need to know what you want, because if you don't know what you want, I can't give you what you don't know you want, right? So that's the complexity. But I kind of want to say sometimes, like in Ricky's case, it is complex, but in some cases, people are not complex. They just benefit from enjoying you right now.
Yes.
And then when that enjoyment becomes a little bit too commitmenty, they're like, I wasn't ready for this anyway.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that is Angie is scared of, right? And she's rightfully scared of it, right? She's completely rightfully scared of it, right? Because she has been used in that way before, right? Her previous experiences are basically encapsulated by people who take what they need from her. I think at some point in it, she says that she's the experience. She's the Angie Appiah experience. She's a fun ride. She's a good time. You learn something about yourself, when you're with her, and then you leave, right? And then you give that commitment to someone else, right? And so she's had that experience, right? I think with Ricky, I would remove the intentionality. I think that a lot of people, and this is something I discovered when I was in the dating realm, was that a lot of people have a hard time even being honest with themselves if the feelings that they're having are in direct conflict with how they think they should behave, right? And so what I was trying to do with him was that, like, he walks the line. Like in the beginning, even when they first meet, he toes the line. She asks him, she said, the moment she tries to define it, he backs off and he's like, whoa, I have a girlfriend, right? He said it's all up like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. That wasn't what I was doing. But Angie has a high EQ. She's like, I know what's going on. I know what this is, right? And it keeps happening. We keep interacting. It's still, the vibes are still there, right? And even when we get to the point where, he doesn't have a girlfriend anymore, right? Like, and he's a free agent, he's still holding back. And it is hard for Angie to believe that he's not holding back because of the same issues with undesirability that she's encountered before, right? And she has honestly kind of every right to feel that way. But I also wanted there to be an element of, I think that a lot of us who've been in these situations also sometimes don't take risks because of this need to preserve ourselves. Like, we don't take that leap, like, because sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know what the entire extent of that person's humanity is. And I think Tabitha tells her in the very beginning of the book, right? Is that she keeps like grabbing the lowest hanging fruit, like the stuff that is like, okay, this looks like it's doing all the things that it should do, right? And Frederick, for example, did all the things, right? He took her out. There were always nice dinners and beautiful dates. And then he claimed her for the first one, who was like, this is my girlfriend. He did all the things he was supposed to do. And at the end of the day, it still didn't work out, right? And so I think that is a huge part of what I was trying to do with their relationship, which is, yes, Ricky's very messy, right? Like they're both messy, but Ricky's messy. But it's that I wanted her to have to take a risk.
So I guess for me, it's interesting that you're talking about the messiness, because there's also the element of loving people with the past. And I think that's something that you explore, right? So often people want to enter relationships and pretend as though the people that they love don't have a past, right? So they don't have anything that's informed their romantic history, that's informed how they relate. And I think it's Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, speaking about, I don't trust anyone with no baggage, because where did you leave your baggage? So you step into this life and you now walk into my space and you have no baggage, which is impossible. What did you do with your baggage? Have you not processed it, or did you leave it with somebody else to deal with? And I think that the Ricky and Angie dynamic is a very interesting exploration of that. What does it mean to love people who have particular paths that also then shape how they relate? And this like Disney fairy tale love that we're looking for. What does it look like when somebody is a person of color with a very real lived experience of familial trauma? Be it when people inflicting it unwillingly or unknowingly, like Angie's parents, or when you have somebody like Ricky who's experienced abandonment. And I'm curious about that, the idea of like loving each other through your past, but also acknowledging that your past shapes in many ways how you relate, even in the present.
Yes, yes. And I think that was like I love that, right? Like that we all bring our own, we bring that trauma from past relationships, past interactions, exactly what you were saying, even things with family, right? Like Angie's approach to Ricky is colored very heavily by her family expectations, right? By the fact that, she too, in a lot of ways, holds back, because oh, thanks. She too, in a way, holds back because she feels like he doesn't fit the standards that, she feels that her parents will have, right? So when he's also sometimes trying to make moves, or he's like, oh, like, come meet my family, come do this, come do that, right? She's like, I don't want to get that deep, right? I'm not trying to do all that, right? In part because she doesn't know where they stand, and she doesn't know whether it's going to be worth it, right? Like to make that risk with her parents and with her family, right? And so I think that I think most of us, exactly, like, where did you leave your baggage? Most of us come and approach relationships with that baggage, right? And for me personally, I didn't see that often, and in the books that I was reading, and I think I said earlier, like, one of the reasons why Angie's dark skinned is because I'm dark skinned, right? Like, and I felt like colorism and texturism and all of that wasn't, and how that impacts dating wasn't often explored, right? That like that, yeah, like someone who's had to deal with and heard the kind of phrasing that says like, oh, you're pretty for a Black girl, right? Or I would like introduce you, but I don't know whether my parents would like you. Or like maybe even from even other like people in your in group, right? Frederick's Black, right? Who's like, oh, you have to be quiet and poised and this because I don't want you to be like an outspoken, loud Black woman in public because how does that make me look, right? Like all of those aspects like that will color how somebody approaches a new relationship. And I wanted those things to come in conflict because I think what happens with the romantic arc with Ricky and Angie is that they, in some ways, like they both had baggage that was in direct opposition to each other, um, and in the sense that Ricky's baggage dictated that he needed to slow down, and Angie's baggage dictated that she needed somebody who could very wholeheartedly, openly claim her, commit to her, love her in that storybook way that she had never experienced before.
So I'm interested in the idea of like labor, okay, and I mean, particularly the labor that Black women do in their lives, right? So almost like we're constantly having to earn particular privileges by proving that we are ride or dies, or that we are, like you are loving, you are motherly, etc., etc., etc. And what I found interesting was the interaction between Angie and Ricky's family that leads her to re-enter his life. And there's a particular kind of, I want to say it's labor, but it's not labor per se, and not in the way that I think has been popularized in pop culture. But there's a particular work that Angie does that I don't know if Ricky returns. So there's a labor that Angie exerts in almost reintegrating herself into his life post that messy breakup that they had, which he's also very responsible for. And I'm curious about why you wrote that in a particular way, because here's this Black woman who in many ways is rebelling against the idea of doing labor. She no longer wants to do labor for her family. She doesn't want to perform in particular ways. I mean, here, in the romantic sense, here she performs again, and she almost has to prove her worth to this family and prove her worth to this man, because here I am, I'm down for it. I'm a ride or die. I should be doing my schoolwork, but I'm actually attending rounds with your family. And there's like a particular exertion that she does that I'm very interested in.
I think that's a curious way of interpreting it because I don't think that's how I would interpret it, especially considering the pacing of the novel because they don't really fully get together until the very end. I think it's more about showing up, right? Like in the way it ends, I wouldn't necessarily position. I think end of life is difficult, and like it's she shows up and is because she loves him, right? And because that's what you should kind of do if you're a good person who's can help somebody that you care about, right? So I think positioning, showing up for people because she's a Black woman is a different take than I think I was probably going for. Especially considering, like of course, like I by the end of the book, right, like he hasn't even met her family, right? Like that doesn't happen for some time, right? And she doesn't let him meet her family, like for some times. I'm not really sure how I could have written it in a way that he could do that similar labor for her.
No, no. So it's less about you having written it differently, and I guess it's really the question that is posed as a challenge to the reader, right? It's like we think of positioning in very particular ways, and I guess that the book then challenges you to think about what does the line look like? Like where are you showing up because you love the person and because you think it's the right thing to do, and where are you showing up because you feel that a particular kind of labor is expected of you in order to prove something about yourself. And it's less of a criticism about how you've written it, but more of me saying this is how the book questioned my own ideas, right? Because was this a particular sensitivity I have because I'm a Black woman, and I felt that often in my life I've had to show up to prove my worth. Or is it more that you show up because you love people and it's the right thing to do, even in a world that benefits so much from your labor and from you showing up in particular ways? And so it's less of a criticism and more of a way in which you challenged both me as a reader, but also a way that I wanted to then challenge you as somebody who wrote this particular thing that challenged me as a person reading it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that like what I was kind of going for in that is that, what does yeah, like exactly what you were saying, like when does it become labor, when does it, because I don't, I think even in it she was like she didn't expect them to get back together, right? Like she was like, I'm going into this with no expectations. I'm going here because it's really hard to navigate the American medical system. I have some understanding and I can help advocate, right? And with the understanding that in throughout her process, right, like maybe like no one in her family has been dying or et cetera, right? But like Ricky has been supportive of her, like while she's been studying, while she's been working, like he's the one who's like helping her stay on track. He's like helps her with like her presentations. Like he's like involving himself in her life in that way, right? At least her professional life in that way. And so even if it's this, of course, this particular, like I don't want to make a spoiler, right? I think that love requires labor, that it's like regardless of your identity, right? Like it requires you have to do labor for love, right? And that of course there are times where we don't want to be put in a place where that labor is unequal, right? But that we also like I don't know whether like it shouldn't be kind of like a tit for tat kind of thing. It should be done because out of love, out of like a true sense of, yeah. I don't know whether that answered that.
No, you did. And I think one thing that I think was interesting about the novel is also these moments of redemption, right? Because we often don't think about like redemption, and I thought like the way in which you tackled redemption in the book was quite powerful, right? So we've got a redemption moment for Angie in relation to a relationship with her best friend, and where she tells herself, in order for me to be a friend that I want to be, I need to be that friend, right? So I need to learn basic things that are important to this person and not just take things for granted, right? And that moment of redemption also speaks to what you're saying about love is labor. It takes work, right? Like love at the core of it is work. It's just not going to happen miraculously. And there is also this moment of redemption from there's also this moment of redemption from the mom, right? Who comes to her as kind of a peace offering and being like, actually, you know what, we were wrong, da 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 da. So there seems to be these moments of redemption, and even I think a moment of redemption for both Angie and Ricky, right? Like when we think about this ending of life thing, right? It's a redemption to be like outside of the, because sometimes it is the fluffy, right, and the
Right.
sort of lovey-dovey and the and the niceness, but outside of that, there is someone who genuinely cares about my well-being and wants to show up for me in ways that are meaningful. Because I
Right.
think the way that Angie showed up at that part, what was a lot, like, right, the abuela also says, like, you really love this boy, right, like, as in only someone who loves someone would be doing this, right? And
Right.
so redemption, for me, as a way of saying that love is worth it, and often love takes work, and I am willing to do the work that it needs in order for me to continue with this relationship.
Right.
Do you know
Right.
what's interesting about the way in which her mother shows up, or her mother's redemption story, is so typical of how parents, often African parents, will not apologize, right? So she won't come in and say, "I am sorry, I'm gonna come and do your hair, but I'm not going to say that I'm sorry. I'm going to show that I'm sorry."
Mhm.
And it's interesting because there's been this tug of war where Angie's almost wanting those people to see her, but to see her in ways are also very particular to Angie, right? Which,
Right.
if you think about where they come from, they're Ghanaian immigrants that have their own histories also a little bit foreign to them, right? So that even that way of interaction is foreign. And I found it so interesting that the moment of redemption was written for in a very particular way. So in a way that a black African parent would do, right? So they would come and say, "I'm so sorry, I was so wrong. This is where I was wrong. This is my 21 action plan." But
Mhm.
there's an act of love that you see that's so undeniable, which is also an act of contrition. And I found it so interesting that you wrote that scene because I think about often how we want the people in our lives to turn up in very particular ways, but also we want things to apologize and to show love in ways that make sense to us, that often doesn't account for different histories, for different experiences. And I think that was such an important moment in the story.
And it's a culturally relevant moment, right? I think that for readers who aren't familiar with this, I
Facts.
often, pardon, right, and that they often read Angie's parents as mean, right? So I see that all the time, that her parents are mean, they never really understood her, right? But without completely understanding like what it's like the relationship between parents and children in these contexts, right? That a lot of like the way Angie's parents have always shown love is by providing for her, right? By sacrificing, providing, and giving, right? And maybe it's not through words, right? And maybe it's not through like in the, which is a fairly, it's probably a more Western concept, right? Is to be like, oh, we want people to come to us and say they're sorry, right? Like, but it's instead through actions, right? In that, like, maybe the WhatsApp messages got a little softer, and then it was like, I'll cook for you, I'll provide for you, right? Like the way they've always shown love. And so I wanted Angie to, who is westernized, right, like to accept that and recognize that for what it was. And I think like in I can't say spoilers. I think it happens in other ways too, like even in the way that I kind of ended things with Ricky and Angie, right? Like that for Ricky, showing up for his family was very important. And for Angie, having like being able to feel like she was loved in a very classical sense was important too. And so I wanted the way like the great grand romantic gesture to be like, no, 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 like this is someone who's using their talents and what is available to them to show love in a way that's very loud, proud, and like open, right? And so I think that was, I think there's different ways, exactly as you kind of picked out in all of the different relationships, different ways that they all kind of showed love to each other in ways that the other person could receive. I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, I think truly, before we go, what was truly beautiful about On Rotation is capturing the essence of our humanity, right? That life truly isn't as clean cut out as we'd like it to be.
Mhm.
That actually life most of the time takes work,
Yeah.
and sometimes things work out and sometimes they don't.
Hmm.
But I think what was really hopeful for me is that, like, I kind of left the book saying to myself, "Letlhogonolo, you need to stop being so hard on yourself, right? Because the world is already so hard on you, right?"
Right.
Like Angie was that for me. Angie was like a mirror to be like, this is who you are. This is how hard you are on yourself. This is how you show up. And like, perhaps maybe like begin to become a little bit kinder and see how that works. So for me personally, thank you for holding up a mirror so that I'm able to be a little bit more kinder to myself.
I love that
Oh,
you said that.
yeah.
I love that you said that because I wanted to say we spoke about everybody's almost points of redemption, but Angie's points of redemption we spoke about in relation to other people. But Angie has her own personal moments of redemption where, without giving away too much, she salvages what we thought was an salvageable moments, right? And there's something so beautiful about that for Black people who move in this world in particular ways, to know that you get given second chances. It often doesn't look like it, but you yourself get given second chances outside of other people. So even outside of your relationship, romantic relationships, or relationships with family, there was something so important about the fact that Angie gets a second chance for herself in this thing that she loves. It's always been her desire, and that's related to her, that has nothing to do with anybody else. And like that was potentially our favorite redemption moments, or like my favorite redemptive arc in the story was that David here's this Black woman who gets told you really only have one shot, getting more than one shot and getting to excel. And that is like my parents' highlights in the story.
Oh, thank
Is the
you.
idea that we have grace. We have
Right.
grace.
Right.
Grace, grace.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy you took that away from it.
Okay, everyone, we're going to leave it right here so that we can let the good doctors do what they do best. One is going on holiday and one is going for work, so let them doctor
So
away.
I can catch my flights, yes.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much for joining us and for being so open and so forthcoming with your answers. We really have appreciated it. Again, as we said, we would recommend On Rotation. It's an absolutely wonderful, I would say, holiday read because it's got a good alight of light, but also important grappling moments. So thank you again for writing On Rotation. We hope that it will do what you want it to do in the world. And hopefully we'll have you here again soon for a new book. But I definitely think we still need to hook up to talk more deeply about some things in the book.
Absolutely. This is so much fun, you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody. Please do get out Dr. Shirlene Obiobi's book. I have to let you know, guys, it is Dr. Shirlene Obuobi. And please get her book. And we can't wait for a second book. We know that there is a second book. We have seen all the press. So yes, like they'll say. But thank you so much once again, and I hope you enjoy your holiday. And at Lokololo, we will see each other in Joburg when I finally get there.
Oh,
Yes, that's fine. We will definitely.
have a safe
And everyone,
journey,
thank you
Alma.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As you've seen,
Bye.
someone has said, love listening to you chatting about On Rotation. Everywhere in the world, there's an Angie and a Messi Ricky. And
A Messi Ricky. A Messi
and
Ricky.
it was like the
A
politics of
Messi
design,
Ricky.
especially for women and queer people. And I just see Jen said,
Highlights.
love this. Thank you all. So
Oh,
thank you
so
everyone
sweet.
for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.